So pour a glass of craft beer, we can do this. Yeah.
So just tell folks, like, how you got into beer writing and sort of,
Sure.
what your sort of situation is.
So I write for a website called beerism.ca.
Do you have other writers, or is it just you?
I had a friend who used to write articles periodically. His name's TJ. He's a really good guy. But in the last year or so, it's been pretty much entirely me. What I try and do on the website is make content that is interesting by examining. Generally, I try to do rarer beers, not even necessarily by design, but more because I want to drink them.
Yeah.
Or I do
fancy
a lot
tastes.
of barrel aged stuff, a lot of wild stuff. I'm into sours a lot now. But that's not to say I don't write about a standard IPA or whatever too. It's whatever I find interesting at that moment. I try to take a pretty in-depth approach to the tasting notes in themselves. I really go through what I think of the nose and the body and all the flavor profile or whatever. But I also don't want it just to be a boring review of the beer. I try and preface the tasting notes with an interesting perspective on either the beer or the scene or Quebec in general. I read a bit about Ontario beers, but I try to focus on Montreal and Quebec because we have an awesome scene here, and that's also what I'm readily able to get, given that this is where we live. And it's cool. And the scene here is amazing, and the people here are amazing.
Yes.
So that's what Beerism is. I got into beer about, I've been drinking beer like how we all have since, we were 17 or 18 or whatever.
Legally obliged to
yes,
do so.
Exactly. But it was a Jude Ciel beer that really made it pop. Okay. So I drank the usual crap that we all drank. I think Stella was my beer or whatever. And then it was actually my father-in-law who kind of started tipping me towards
craft?
Yeah, because in Ontario at the time, this is 6 years ago, they had a huge selection of English beers. So English ales like Fuller's and Bomber.
Oh yes,
it's Spitfire and those ones, right?
Yeah.
And that's what he loved to drink.
That's so solid, dude.
Yeah, so I was going to him and he was pouring these beers and I'm like, oh my god, these are fucking fantastic. So I was like, screw all those lagers, I don't care about that. And then so I really started getting into it. So I'd go to the LCBO and just stock up on English ales, and I didn't even know what a fucking ale was. I thought I thought an ale with a style of beer and not like
a
what it
family
actually is.
Beer,
yeah. And then I was going to beer deponeurs around Montreal, and I would grab a bunch of beers and I would try them. I don't really like these. Because they always tended to be on kind of the Belgian scale or whatever, and it wasn't. I like them now, but at the time I didn't.
They're not for rookies necessarily.
It kind of depends on the palate, I guess.
That's
but
true.
I guess I was in the hunt for that malty English ale. That's where my mind was, and then I tried everything. It's too dry or what? It's just not my
Sharp
thing.
Or fruity, yeah.
And there was no one brewed like a solid English ale here at the time, in my opinion. At least not that I've found. Anyway, and then one day, I started still experimenting or whatever, and I found a bottle of Jude Ciel's Corne de Diable, which is their standard American IPA, which I think they still brew periodically.
Oh yeah, no, I've had that though.
And it's funny because you drink that now, most beer geeks will be like, this is malty and there's not much of a hop profile. At the time, I took a sip and it was like someone just punched me in the nose with a citrusy explosion. And I remember my whole mouth just tasting bitterness
buzzing.
And just be like, oh, what is going on in this fucking bottle? And then as you sip it, you're like, oh, it's so intense. And then as it continues, it becomes this almost addiction to the hops. It's just oh yes,
tell me
yes,
about it.
More of this weird piney tongue stabbing bitterness. And then that was it. And at that point, I was like, I need to go down this route, and then through that, Jude Ciel had a lot to do with me becoming a beer geek, I think, because I remember trying Dernier Volonté, which is a beer that kind of still exists because the only version that exists now is the Brett version.
Okay,
but at the time it had a different label and everything, and that was a Belgian pale ale, and I wasn't really into the Belgian thing, but it was crossover enough because it was a little bit hoppy to bring me towards that, and then I got really big into the Trappist stuff and the Belgian stuff, and then it was everything. Then it was craft, and then obviously IPAs and all that. And then,
of course,
Started the blog.
So you
And
would
that's
just
where I am
decide to
now.
review the
Yeah,
beers
so
that
I
you would get, just like-
I would go on like social media, like Facebook at the time, post these pictures and do like these terribly written short paragraphs with full of spelling mistakes. But then people were really supportive. They're like, "Hey, you're cool. You're like now the beer guy or whatever." Not a lot of people were doing it back then.
2011, eh?
Yeah.
So we started at the same time.
Yeah, exactly. And then from there, I just created the blog and then started really writing, which was a lot of fun.